Teacher ignores foster girl's dark secret until she finds a hidden notebook. Amanda Scott, a veteran English teacher at Northwood High School in suburban Sacramento, California, prided herself on her ability to connect with her students. She wasn't just a teacher, she was a confidant, a mentor, a shoulder to cry on. Over her 20 years of teaching, she'd seen it all: teenage angst, family drama, broken hearts, and academic struggles. She had a knack for spotting the kids who were struggling, the ones who needed a little extra attention, a little extra encouragement. But Sophie Murrow was a puzzle. Sophie had transferred to Northwood High midway through the fall semester. She was 14, small for her age, with long, dark hair that often obscured her face, and large, brown eyes that seemed to hold a perpetual sadness. She was exceptionally bright, acing every test and assignment, but she rarely spoke in class, never volunteered answers, and seemed to shrink into herself whenever Amanda tried to engage her. Amanda had reviewed Sophie's records, which indicated a history of frequent moves and changes in schools. She was currently in the foster care system, living with a family named the Millers. The records were sparse, providing little insight into Sophie's past or her current circumstances. There were no red flags, no reports of behavioral problems or academic difficulties. On paper, she seemed like a model student, yet Amanda couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was a guardedness about Sophie, a fragility that belied her academic achievements. She never smiled, never laughed, never interacted with her classmates. She ate lunch alone in the library, buried in a book, seemingly oblivious to the bustling activity around her. She wore long sleeves, even on warmer days, and always seemed to be trying to make herself as small and inconspicuous as possible. Amanda had tried to reach out to Sophie on several occasions. She'd asked her to stay after class, offering extra help or just a chance to chat. Sophie had politely declined, mumbling something about needing to catch the bus. She'd tried to engage her in class discussions, but Sophie would only offer brief, monosyllabic answers, her eyes darting around nervously. Amanda had even contacted the Millers, Sophie's foster parents, to express her concerns. She'd spoken to Mrs. Miller, a woman with a pleasant but somewhat detached voice, who had assured her that Sophie was just shy and that she was adjusting well to her new home. Mrs. Miller had thanked Amanda for her concern but had seemed uninterested in discussing Sophie's situation further. Amanda was frustrated. She knew something wasn't right, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She had no concrete evidence, no specific reason to suspect anything was amiss. It was just a feeling, a gut instinct, honed by years of experience working with teenagers. She observed Sophie in the hallways, watching her interact, or rather, not interact with other students. She saw the way the other kids seemed to ignore her, the way she blended into the background, almost invisible. She saw the loneliness in her eyes, the weight on her shoulders. It was a weight that no 14-year-old should have to carry. Amanda decided to try a different approach. She assigned a personal essay, a getting-to-know-you assignment, hoping that Sophie might reveal something about herself in writing that she wouldn't share verbally. She gave the students a week to complete the essay, encouraging them to be honest and open. She hoped that this might be the key to unlocking Sophie's silence. The week passed slowly. Amanda watched Sophie carefully, observing her interactions, her body language, her demeanor. She saw no significant changes. Sophie remained withdrawn, isolated, a ghost in the crowded hallways of Northwood High. During lunch breaks, Amanda often patrolled the library, knowing that's where Sophie would be. She'd find her tucked away in a corner, surrounded by books, her lunch tray untouched. Amanda would try to make casual conversation, asking her about her favorite books, her interests, anything to elicit a response. But Sophie's answers were always brief and evasive. She seemed to be building a wall around herself, a wall that Amanda was determined to break down. One day, Amanda noticed a group of girls giggling and whispering as Sophie walked past. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw the way Sophie flinched, the way her shoulders slumped even further. It was clear that she was being bullied, or at the very least, ostracized. Amanda intervened, gently reprimanding the girls, but she knew it wouldn't solve the problem. Sophie was an easy target, her quietness and vulnerability making her a magnet for the cruelty of some teenagers. Later that day, Amanda saw Sophie sitting alone on a bench outside the school, waiting for the bus. She decided to approach her again, this time with a different tactic. "Sophie," she said softly, sitting down beside her. "I know you're going through something, and I know it's hard to talk about it, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. If you ever need anything at all, please don't hesitate to come to me." Sophie didn't look at her, just stared at the ground, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm fine," she mumbled. Amanda sighed inwardly. She knew Sophie wasn't fine, but she also knew she couldn't force her to open up. She had to earn her trust, to show her that she was a safe person. "I know it might not seem like it," Amanda continued, "but I care about you, Sophie. I care about all my students. And I want to help you, if you'll let me." She saw a flicker of something in Sophie's eyes, a hint of vulnerability, a glimmer of hope. But it was fleeting. Sophie quickly looked away, her defenses back in place. "I have to go," she said, standing up abruptly. "The bus is here." Amanda watched her walk away, her heart heavy. She felt like she was failing Sophie, failing to reach her, failing to protect her. She knew she had to do something, but she didn't know what. The next day, the students turned in their personal essays. Amanda collected them eagerly, hoping that Sophie's essay might offer some insight into her life, some clue to the mystery that surrounded her. She graded the essays that evening, reading through the stories of teenage dreams, anxieties, and aspiration. Some were funny, some were sad, some were profound, and some were simply mundane. But they all offered a glimpse into the lives of her students, a glimpse that she valued and cherished. Finally, she reached Sophie's essay. It was short, only a few paragraphs, and written in a neat, careful hand. But the words were bland, generic, revealing nothing of Sophie's personality or her experiences. It was as if she had deliberately written the most unrevealing essay possible. Amanda was disappointed, but not surprised. She had expected as much. She put the essay aside, feeling a growing sense of frustration and helplessness. She was running out of ideas, running out of time. She knew she had to do something, and she had to do it soon. The following day, during a particularly chaotic class period, the breakthrough came, unexpectedly and dramatically. Amanda was trying to restore order after a group activity had devolved into a shouting match. Students were milling around, talking loudly, and generally ignoring her instructions. In the midst of the chaos, Amanda saw Sophie standing near her desk, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She was looking down at the floor, her face pale. As Amanda approached her, she saw what had happened. Sophie's backpack had apparently slipped off her shoulder and fallen to the floor, spilling some of its contents. Amanda knelt down to help her gather her belongings. She picked up a few textbooks, a pencil case, and a small, spiral-bound notebook. The notebook was plain, with a black cover, and remarkable in every way. As Amanda reached for the notebook, Sophie's hand shot out, trying to grab it. But it was too late. Amanda had already picked it up, and as she did, the notebook fell open. Amanda's eyes were drawn to the open page. It wasn't filled with notes or homework assignments. It was filled with drawings. Drawings of a young girl, cowering in a corner, her face contorted in fear. Drawings of a large, shadowy figure, looming over the girl, his hand raised in a threatening gesture. Drawings of bars, cages, and chains. Amanda's breath caught in her throat. She flipped through the pages, her heart pounding in her chest. The drawings were crude, but they were also incredibly powerful, conveying a sense of terror and desperation that was unmistakable. Interspersed among the drawings were handwritten notes, short, fragmented sentences, written in a shaky hand. "I want to run away, but I can't. He said if I tell anyone, I'll never be found. I'm so scared. Please, someone help me. I don't want to do this anymore." Amanda felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She looked up at Sophie, her eyes wide with horror. Sophie was staring at her, her face a mask of fear and shame. "Sophie," Amanda whispered, her voice trembling. "What is this?" Sophie didn't answer, just stood there, frozen, her eyes darting around nervously. She looked like a trapped animal, desperate to escape. Amanda knew, in that instant, that her suspicions were confirmed. Sophie was in danger, serious danger. The notebook was a cry for help, a desperate plea from a child trapped in a nightmare. Amanda closed the notebook, her hands shaking. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. She needed to be calm, to be strong, for Sophie's sake. "Sophie," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I need you to come with me." She gently took Sophie's arm and led her out of the classroom, ignoring the curious stares of the other students. She took her to the school counselor's office, a safe and private space where they could talk. She closed the door behind them, ensuring their privacy. She sat down across from Sophie, the notebook resting on the table between them. "Sophie," Amanda said, her voice filled with compassion. "I know you're scared, but I'm here to help you. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Sophie finally broke down, tears streaming down her face. She buried her head in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. Amanda reached out and gently touched her arm, offering a silent gesture of comfort. It was the beginning of a long and difficult journey, but it was also the beginning of Sophie's liberation. The notebook, accidentally discovered, had opened a door to a world of darkness, a world that Amanda was now determined to expose and destroy. The hours that followed were a blur of hushed conversations, anxious phone calls, and mounting dread. Amanda, with Sophie's hesitant permission, showed the notebook to Mrs. Davison, the school counselor. Mrs. Davison, a seasoned professional with years of experience dealing with troubled youth, immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. Her face paled as she examined the drawings and read the desperate notes. "Amanda," she said, her voice grave, "this is serious. This is beyond anything we can handle here at school. We need to contact Child Protective Services immediately." Amanda nodded, her heart pounding. She knew Mrs. Davison was right, but the thought of involving the authorities filled her with trepidation. She worried about Sophie, about what would happen to her, about whether she would be safe. But she also knew that she had no choice. Sophie's life was at stake. They called CPS, and a caseworker, a stern-looking woman named Ms. Ramirez, no relation to the Detective Ramirez from the previous story, arrived within the hour. Ms. Ramirez interviewed Sophie, gently and patiently, asking her about the drawings, the notes, and the person she referred to as he. Sophie was initially reluctant to talk, her fear palpable, but with Amanda and Mrs. Davison by her side, offering support and encouragement, she slowly began to open up. She spoke in a halting whisper, her voice choked with emotion, describing a life of fear, abuse, and exploitation. She revealed that her foster father, Mr. Miller, had been forcing her to participate in activities that Amanda could barely comprehend. Activities that were illegal, immoral, and deeply traumatizing. She spoke of being locked in her room, of being threatened, of being forced to do things that made her feel ashamed and dirty. As Sophie spoke, Amanda felt a growing sense of rage, a burning anger that threatened to consume her. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to protect Sophie from the horrors she had endured. But she forced herself to remain calm, to be a source of strength for the terrified girl. Ms. Ramirez listened intently, taking notes, asking clarifying questions, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. She assured Sophie that she was safe now, that she would be protected, that Mr. Miller would be brought to justice. After the interview, Ms. Ramirez turned to Amanda and Mrs. Davison. "We need to take Sophie into protective custody," she said, "and we need to launch a full-scale investigation into Mr. and Mrs. Miller. This is a very serious situation." Amanda felt a wave of relief wash over her. Sophie was safe, at least for now. But she also knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. Ms. Ramirez asked Amanda to provide a written statement, detailing her observations of Sophie, her interactions with her, and the discovery of the notebook. Amanda agreed, knowing that her testimony would be crucial to the investigation. As Ms. Ramirez and Sophie left the school, Amanda felt a profound sense of responsibility. She had stumbled upon a dark secret, a hidden world of abuse and exploitation. And now, she was a key player in bringing that world to light. She spent the rest of the day and much of the night writing her statement, carefully recounting every detail, every nuance, every conversation. She described Sophie's withdrawn behavior, her isolation, her fear, and the chilling contents of the notebook. She also did some research, trying to understand the complexities of child trafficking, the foster care system, and the legal procedures involved. She learned about the prevalence of child abuse, the insidious ways in which traffickers operate, and the challenges of prosecuting these cases. The more she learned, the more determined she became to help Sophie, to see justice served, and to ensure that no other child would have to endure the horrors that Sophie had experienced. She knew that she was in for a long and difficult fight, but she was ready. She would not let Sophie down. Despite the urgency of the situation and the clear evidence presented in Sophie's notebook, Amanda felt a nagging need for reassurance and guidance. She was a teacher, not a social worker or a police officer. She was stepping into unfamiliar territory, and the weight of responsibility felt heavy on her shoulders. She decided to confide in her closest friend, Sarah, a social worker with years of experience in child protective services. Sarah was known for her calm demeanor, her sharp intellect, and her unwavering commitment to protecting vulnerable children. Amanda knew she could trust Sarah to give her honest advice and support. Amanda arranged to meet Sarah for coffee after school, carefully choosing a quiet cafe where they could talk privately. As she recounted the events of the past few days, describing Sophie's behavior, the notebook, and the CPS investigation, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her: fear, anger, guilt, and a profound sense of sadness. Sarah listened intently, her expression a mixture of concern and professional assessment. When Amanda finished, Sarah took a deep breath and said, "Amanda, you did the right thing. You absolutely did the right thing. That notebook, it's a clear cry for help. And Sophie is incredibly lucky to have you in her corner." Amanda felt a surge of relief at Sarah's words, but she also expressed her doubts and anxieties. "But what if I'm wrong?" she asked. "What if I misinterpreted the drawings? What if the Millers are just strict, and I'm overreacting?" Sarah shook her head firmly. "Amanda, trust your instincts. You've been a teacher for 20 years. You know when something's not right. And those drawings, they're not the product of a strict upbringing. They depict abuse, clear and simple. And the notes, 'I want to run away but I can't. He said if I tell anyone, I'll never be found.' Those are not the words of a child who's just having a hard time adjusting." Sarah explained the dynamics of child abuse, the common signs and symptoms, and the reasons why children often don't disclose the abuse directly. She talked about the fear, the shame, the manipulation, and the threats that abusers use to control their victims. "Children like Sophie often communicate through indirect means," Sarah explained. "Through drawings, through writing, through changes in behavior. They're testing the waters, hoping someone will notice, hoping someone will help, but they're also terrified of the consequences of speaking out." Sarah's words reinforced Amanda's conviction that she had done the right thing, but she also warned her about the challenges ahead. "The Millers will likely deny everything," Sarah said. "They'll probably try to discredit Sophie, to paint her as a troubled child, a liar. They might even try to turn the tables on you, accusing you of interfering in their family." Amanda felt a chill run down her spine. She hadn't considered the possibility that she might become a target. "Be prepared for a fight, Amanda," Sarah continued. "The foster care system is often overworked and understaffed. Cases like this can drag on for months, even years. And the legal process can be incredibly frustrating." Sarah offered practical advice, suggesting that Amanda document everything, keep a detailed record of all her interactions with Sophie and the authorities, and seek legal counsel if necessary. She also emphasized the importance of self-care, reminding Amanda that she needed to take care of herself in order to be able to support Sophie. Before they parted, Sarah gave Amanda a hug. "You're a good person, Amanda," she said. "And you're doing the right thing. Don't doubt yourself. Just keep fighting for Sophie." Amanda left the cafe feeling strengthened and reassured. Sarah's advice had been invaluable, providing her with both practical guidance and emotional support. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was no longer alone. She had Sarah's support, and she had the unwavering conviction that she was fighting for a just cause. However, not all reactions were supportive. When Amanda cautiously shared the situation with a fellow teacher, Mr. Henderson, during a lunch break, she was met with skepticism. "Are you sure you're not reading too much into this, Amanda?" Mr. Henderson asked, stirring his coffee. Teenagers can be dramatic. And that notebook, well, kids draw all sorts of things. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. Amanda felt a surge of frustration. But the notes, Mr. Henderson, she insisted. The fear in her eyes. It's not just teenage drama. Mr. Henderson shrugged. I'm just saying, be careful. You don't want to get involved in something that's not your business. You could get yourself into a lot of trouble. These foster parents, they could sue you for defamation. Amanda felt her resolve waver slightly. Mr. Henderson's words echoed her own fears, the doubts that had been lurking in the back of her mind. But she pushed them aside. She couldn't ignore what she had seen, what she knew to be true. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Henderson, she said firmly, but I have to do what I think is right. I can't just stand by and do nothing. She left the lunchroom, feeling more determined than ever. She wouldn't let doubt or fear deter her. She would fight for Sophie, no matter the cost. The conversation with Mr. Henderson, while unsettling, ultimately solidified Amanda's resolve. She spent the evening wrestling with her conscience, weighing the potential risks against the moral imperative to protect Sophie. The fear of legal repercussions, of professional damage, of making a mistake, was real. But the image of Sophie's terrified face, the desperate pleas scrawled in the notebook, were far more powerful. She re-examined the notebook, poring over the drawings and notes, searching for any additional clues, any details that might help the investigation. She noticed patterns in the drawings, recurring symbols, and images that seemed to hold a deeper meaning. She made a list of these symbols, hoping that they might provide some insight into Sophie's experiences. She also researched online resources for victims of child trafficking and abuse, learning about the support services available, the legal rights of victims, and the long-term effects of trauma. She wanted to be as informed as possible, to be able to advocate for Sophie effectively. She tried to imagine what Sophie was going through, the fear, the isolation, the sense of hopelessness. She thought about her own niece, a bright and bubbly 14-year-old, and the thought of her being subjected to such horrors made her blood run cold. She knew that if she didn't act, Sophie's situation might never come to light. The Millers might continue their abuse, unchecked and unpunished. Sophie might disappear, another statistic in the grim reality of child trafficking. The thought was unbearable. She made her decision. She would contact the police, in addition to CPS. She felt that the severity of the situation warranted a criminal investigation, and she wanted to ensure that the Millers were held accountable for their actions. She knew that this decision might have consequences, that it might disrupt her life, that it might even put her in danger. But she didn't care. She had a moral obligation to protect Sophie, to do everything in her power to help her escape the nightmare she was living. She picked up the phone and dialed the non-emergency number for the Sacramento Police Department. She explained the situation to the operator, emphasizing the urgency and the potential for child trafficking. She requested to speak with a detective specializing in child abuse cases. After a brief hold, she was connected with Detective Reynolds, a different detective with the same last name, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for being tough but fair. Amanda recounted the story, her voice trembling slightly, but her determination unwavering. She described Sophie's behavior, the notebook, and the CPS investigation. Detective Reynolds listened patiently, asking clarifying questions, his tone professional but also empathetic. He assured Amanda that he would take her concerns seriously and that he would launch an investigation immediately. Ms. Scott, he said, you did the right thing by calling us. This is a very serious situation, and we need to act quickly. We'll need to interview Sophie again, and we'll need to obtain a warrant to search the Millers' residence. Amanda felt a surge of relief. The wheels were in motion. The authorities were taking action. Sophie was one step closer to freedom. Thank you, Detective, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Thank you for taking this seriously. We take all allegations of child abuse seriously, Ms. Scott, Detective Reynolds said, and we appreciate your courage in coming forward. You may have saved this girl's life. Amanda hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had done what she could. Now, it was up to the authorities to do their job. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was prepared to face it, for Sophie's sake. She was ready to be her advocate, her protector, her voice. She would not let her down. The investigation unfolded with a methodical intensity that both reassured and unnerved Amanda. Detective Reynolds kept her informed of the major developments, treating her with a respect that acknowledged her crucial role in uncovering the truth. The first step was a second interview with Sophie, this time conducted by Detective Reynolds, an especially trained child forensic interviewer. This interview took place at a child advocacy center, a safe and neutral environment designed to minimize trauma for child victims. Amanda was not present for the interview itself, to avoid any potential influence or pressure on Sophie, but she waited anxiously outside, her heart heavy with worry. After several hours, Detective Reynolds emerged, his expression grim but resolute. She corroborated her earlier statements, he told Amanda, and she provided additional details, very disturbing details. We have enough to move forward. The details, which Detective Reynolds shared with Amanda in a later, private conversation, were horrifying. Sophie described a systematic pattern of abuse and exploitation, confirming Amanda's worst fears. She spoke of being forced to perform sexual acts for money, of being drugged and transported to different locations, of being constantly threatened and intimidated. Amanda listened in stunned silence, her stomach churning, her mind struggling to comprehend the depravity of the Millers' actions. She felt a surge of rage, a burning desire for justice, but she also felt an overwhelming sense of sadness and compassion for Sophie. The next step was obtaining a search warrant for the Millers' residence. Detective Reynolds presented the evidence to a judge of Sophie's testimony, the notebook, Amanda's statement, and the corroborating information from the Child Advocacy Center interview. The judge swiftly issued the warrant, recognizing the urgency and the gravity of the situation. While waiting for the warrant to be executed, Detective Reynolds focused on gathering additional evidence. He interviewed neighbors, reviewed financial records, and examined phone records, looking for any indication of the Millers' illegal activities. The neighbors, initially hesitant to speak, gradually opened up, revealing a pattern of suspicious behavior. They described strange visitors coming and going at all hours of the night, seeing Sophie looking increasingly withdrawn and frightened, and hearing muffled cries and arguments coming from the house. The financial records revealed a series of unexplained cash deposits and withdrawals, suggesting a source of income beyond Mr. Miller's legitimate employment. The phone records showed numerous calls to and from numbers associated with known escort services and adult entertainment websites. The evidence was mounting, painting a damning picture of the Millers' operation. It was clear that they were not just abusive foster parents, they were running a sophisticated child trafficking ring, exploiting vulnerable children for profit. Amanda, meanwhile, was struggling to balance her professional responsibilities with her growing involvement in the case. She found it difficult to concentrate on her teaching, her mind constantly preoccupied with Sophie's well-being and the progress of the investigation. She was grateful for the support of Mrs. Davison, the school counselor, who helped her navigate the emotional and logistical challenges. She also continued to research child trafficking, learning about the legal procedures, the support services available for victims, and the long-term effects of trauma. She wanted to be as prepared as possible to help Sophie through the difficult journey ahead. She knew that the raid on the Millers' residence was imminent, and she waited with a mixture of anticipation and dread. She knew it was necessary to bring the Millers to justice and to rescue any other potential victims, but she also worried about the impact on Sophie, the trauma of reliving the experience, the uncertainty of what the future held. The day of the raid arrived with a tense, quiet dawn. Amanda wasn't present at the scene, as Detective Reynolds had advised her to stay away for her own safety and to avoid any potential legal complications. But she was kept informed of the events through phone calls and text messages from the detective. The raid was executed by a SWAT team, accompanied by officers from the Child Exploitation Unit and representatives from Child Protective Services. They arrived at the Millers' residence in the early morning hours, catching the couple by surprise. The Millers were arrested without incident, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. They initially denied all allegations, claiming that Sophie was a troubled child who made up stories. But their denials rang hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence. A thorough search of the house revealed a horrifying scene. Hidden compartments, locked rooms, and a collection of disturbing paraphernalia confirmed Sophie's testimony. They found restraints, drugs, and a stash of cash. Most damningly, they discovered a hidden room in the basement, equipped with video recording equipment and a variety of props used for child pornography. They also found evidence suggesting that Sophie was not the only victim. They discovered photographs and videos of other young girls, along with contact information for potential clients. The scope of the Millers' operation was far larger and more sinister than anyone had initially imagined. Detective Reynolds called Amanda with the news. "We got them, Ms. Scott," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and grim satisfaction. "We found enough evidence to put them away for life. And we found others. Other victims." Amanda felt a wave of emotion wash over her, relief that the Millers were in custody, horror at the extent of their crimes, and a profound sadness for the other victims who had been subjected to their abuse. "How's Sophie?" Amanda asked, her voice trembling. "She's safe," Detective Reynolds assured her. "She's being taken to a secure location, where she'll receive medical attention and counseling. She's shaken up, obviously, but she's strong. She's a survivor." Amanda knew that Sophie's journey to recovery would be long and arduous, but she was grateful that she was finally free from the Millers' grasp. She was also incredibly proud of Sophie's courage, her strength, and her resilience. The news of the raid and the arrests made headlines, sending shockwaves through the community. The Millers, who had presented themselves as a respectable, church-going couple, were exposed as monsters, preying on vulnerable children. The public outcry was swift and fierce, demanding justice for Sophie and the other victims. Amanda found herself thrust into the spotlight, hailed as a hero for uncovering the truth and saving Sophie's life. She received numerous messages of support and gratitude, but she also faced some criticism and skepticism from those who questioned her motives or doubted her story. She tried to ignore the negativity, focusing instead on supporting Sophie and cooperating with the ongoing investigation. She provided additional testimony to the police, sharing her observations and insights, helping them piece together the full extent of the Millers' crimes. The unraveling of the truth was a slow and painful process, but it was also a necessary one. It brought the Millers' reign of terror to an end, and it offered a glimmer of hope for the victims, a chance to heal, to rebuild their lives, and to find justice. The immediate aftermath of the rescue was a blur of activity and emotion. Sophie was taken to a specialized children's hospital, where she underwent a thorough medical examination and began receiving intensive therapy. The physical and emotional scars of her abuse were deep, and the healing process would be long and challenging. Amanda was allowed to visit Sophie a few days after the raid. She was nervous, unsure of how Sophie would react to seeing her. She brought a small bouquet of flowers and a new, blank notebook, hoping to offer a symbol of hope and a fresh start. She found Sophie sitting in a quiet room, her eyes fixed on a window overlooking a garden. She looked small and fragile, but there was also a newfound strength in her posture, a resilience that had not been there before. "Sophie," Amanda said softly, approaching her slowly. Sophie turned to face her, her eyes widening slightly. She didn't smile, but there was a flicker of recognition, a hint of warmth. "Hi," she whispered. Amanda sat down beside her, offering her the flowers and the notebook. "I brought you these," she said. "I thought you might like them." Sophie took the gifts, her fingers brushing against Amanda's. She looked at the flowers, then at the notebook, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves outside the window. Amanda didn't push her to talk, didn't ask her about the ordeal she had been through. She just wanted to be there for her, to offer her a sense of comfort and support. "How are you feeling, Sophie?" Amanda asked finally. Sophie shrugged, her gaze still fixed on the window. "Okay, I guess. It's okay to not be okay, Sophie," Amanda said. "What you went through, it was terrible, but you're safe now, and you're going to get help." Sophie looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness, fear, and a flicker of hope. "The doctors, they're nice," she said. "And the therapist, she helps me talk about it." "That's good, Sophie," Amanda said. "Talking about it is important. It helps you heal." They talked for a while longer, about school, about books, about anything but the horrors Sophie had endured. Amanda tried to keep the conversation light and positive, to offer a distraction from the pain. As Amanda was leaving, Sophie surprised her by reaching out and taking her hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger this time. "Thank you for saving me." Amanda squeezed her hand, her eyes welling up with tears. "You saved yourself, Sophie," she said. "You were so brave. And I'm so proud of you." Amanda left the hospital feeling a mixture of emotions: a sadness for what Sophie had been through, relief that she was safe, and a profound sense of hope for her future. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was determined to be there for Sophie, to support her every step of the way. In the following weeks, Sophie began intensive therapy, working with a team of specialists to address the trauma she had experienced. She was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD), anxiety, and depression. She had nightmares, flashbacks, and panic attacks. She struggled to trust adults, to form relationships, to feel safe. But slowly, gradually, she began to heal. She learned coping mechanisms, ways to manage her anxiety and fear. She started to open up, to share her experiences, to express her emotions. She discovered a talent for art, using drawing and painting as a way to process her trauma and express her inner world. Amanda visited Sophie regularly, offering her unwavering support and encouragement. She brought her books, art supplies, and small gifts, but most importantly, she brought her presence, her listening ear, her compassionate heart. She became a constant in Sophie's life, a source of stability and trust. The foster care system, recognizing the bond between Amanda and Sophie, and acknowledging Amanda's pivotal role in Sophie's rescue, approached Amanda with a suggestion: would she consider becoming Sophie's foster parent? Amanda was initially surprised, even overwhelmed, by the prospect. She had never considered fostering or adopting a child. She was a single woman, dedicated to her career, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for the responsibility of raising a teenager, especially one who had been through so much trauma. But she also knew that she couldn't say no. She had grown to care deeply for Sophie, and she knew that she could provide her with a safe, loving, and supportive home. She had already become a mother figure to her, in many ways. She discussed the possibility with Sarah, her social worker friend, who offered her encouragement and guidance. She also talked to her family and friends, seeking their support and advice. After careful consideration, Amanda made her decision. She would become Sophie's foster parent. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to take on the challenge. She was ready to give Sophie the family she deserved. The legal proceedings against the Millers were lengthy and complex. They were charged with multiple counts of human trafficking, child sexual abuse, and conspiracy. They hired a team of expensive lawyers who fought aggressively to defend them, employing every legal tactic they could to delay the trial and discredit the evidence. The defense strategy focused on portraying Sophie as a troubled and unreliable witness, suggesting that she had fabricated the allegations against the Millers. They tried to paint Amanda as an overzealous teacher who had manipulated Sophie and interfered in a family matter. Amanda found herself caught in the middle of a legal and emotional storm. She was called to testify at numerous hearings and depositions, facing intense cross-examination from the Millers' attorneys. She had to relive the events of the past months, recounting the details of Sophie's abuse, defending her own actions, and enduring personal attacks on her character. It was a grueling and exhausting experience, but Amanda remained steadfast. She knew that Sophie's future depended on her, and she refused to be intimidated or silenced. She testified truthfully and forcefully, presenting the evidence with clarity and conviction. Detective Reynolds and the prosecution team worked tirelessly to build a strong case against the Millers. They gathered additional evidence, interviewed more witnesses, and consulted with experts in child trafficking and abuse. They were determined to secure a conviction and ensure that the Millers would never harm another child. Meanwhile, Amanda's role in Sophie's life continued to grow. She became officially certified as a foster parent, undergoing extensive training and background checks. She prepared her home for Sophie's arrival, creating a safe and welcoming space for her. She worked closely with Sophie's therapist, Dr. Carter, learning about the effects of trauma and the best ways to support Sophie's recovery. She attended family therapy sessions with Sophie, helping her to process her emotions and build healthy coping mechanisms. She also became Sophie's advocate in the legal system, attending court hearings, meeting with prosecutors, and ensuring that Sophie's voice was heard. She protected her from the media, shielding her from the intrusive glare of publicity. The bond between Amanda and Sophie deepened with each passing day. They shared meals, watched movies, went for walks, and talked about everything and nothing. Amanda learned about Sophie's hopes and dreams, her fears and anxieties, her likes and dislikes. Sophie, in turn, began to trust Amanda, to open up to her, to see her as a mother figure. The trial began. The trial of the Millers was a highly publicized event, drawing national attention to the issue of child trafficking. The courtroom was packed with reporters, advocates, and concerned citizens. The evidence presented by the prosecution was overwhelming and damning. Sophie, despite her initial fear and anxiety, testified bravely and truthfully. She recounted the horrors she had endured, her voice trembling but firm. She faced her abusers with courage and dignity, refusing to be intimidated or silenced. Amanda testified as well, describing her discovery of the notebook, her interactions with Sophie, and her observations of the Millers' suspicious behavior. She was subjected to intense cross-examination by the defense attorneys, but she held her ground, answering their questions with honesty and clarity. The jury deliberated for several days, carefully weighing the evidence and the testimony. Finally, they reached a verdict, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Sophie, sitting beside Amanda, burst into tears, tears of relief and vindication. Amanda hugged her tightly, her own eyes welling up with tears. Justice had been served. The Millers were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. They were led away in shackles, their faces devoid of emotion, their reign of terror finally over. With the trial behind them, Amanda and Sophie could finally focus on building their new life together. Amanda formally petitioned the court to adopt Sophie, and after a thorough review process, her petition was granted. The adoption ceremony was a small, private affair, attended by Amanda's close family and friends, and by Sarah, who had been a constant source of support throughout the ordeal. Sophie, radiant with happiness, officially became Sophie Scott, Amanda's daughter. The years that followed were filled with challenges and triumphs. Sophie continued to heal from the trauma of her past, with Amanda's unwavering love and support. She excelled in school, pursued her passion for art, and made new friends. She gradually learned to trust again, to open her heart to the world, to embrace the possibility of a happy and fulfilling life. Amanda, in turn, found a new sense of purpose and fulfillment in motherhood. She learned to balance her career as a teacher with the demands of raising a teenager, and she discovered a depth of love and connection that she had never known before. They became a family, bound together by a shared experience, a mutual respect, and an unbreakable bond of love. Sophie's past would always be a part of her, but it would not define her. She was a survivor, a fighter, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And Amanda, the teacher who had listened, who had believed, who had acted, had not only saved a child's life, but had also found a daughter, a family, and a renewed sense of purpose in her own life. The notebook, once a symbol of despair, had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, light can prevail. The story finished with an happy end, and it showed the brave from teacher and children.